It's funny what your brain chooses to remember when your world tilts sideways. For me, it was the squeak of the HR chair, one of those wobbly budget models pretending to be ergonomic. The office smelled of lemon disinfectant, the kind meant to cover up the stale air of too many polite betrayals. Across from me sat a woman in a blazer a shade too cheerful for the task at hand. Her eyes blinked with rehearsed sympathy as she slid an envelope across the table. "Effective immediately," she said, her voice soft but practiced. The words landed without ceremony, like a dull thud. Inside that envelope was my final paycheck, a severance letter, and a polite reminder that loyalty had an expiration date. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. 15 years at the company had taught me the policies better than the people reciting them. I was the one who had rewritten the scripts, who had dressed up messy numbers until they shone like promises. I knew the weight of what was being discarded, and it wasn't mine. "For the CFO's request," she added, as though it was a detail that mattered. Translation: he hadn't the courage to look me in the eye. This from the same man who once called me mission critical when investor trust was thin, and we needed more than smoke and mirrors to keep the machine running. Now I was reduced to a line item in a cost-saving initiative. "Don't worry," the HR woman said as she stood, smoothing her skirt like she was tucking me neatly out of sight. "We'll control the narrative." I smiled politely. The kind of smile you give at funerals when someone says, "She's in a better place now." They thought this was control. They thought erasing my name from the system and seating a fresh face in my chair meant I'd be forgotten by next quarter's slides. I left without fuss. No slammed doors, no raised voice. I've always believed silence unsettles people more than outrage. As I walked through the hallways, faces turned to stone. Colleagues who had sung my praises at company meetings suddenly found their coffee cups fascinating. My nameplate was already gone from the door. In its place, a strip of duct tape with the word transitioning scrawled in black Sharpie. Efficient, impersonal. Back home, I moved through the familiar rhythm of an evening. Feed the dog, microwave leftovers, pour wine that tasted faintly of iron resolve. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the fridge. I set my bag on the counter, pulled my laptop out, and booted it up more out of habit than purpose. The portal flickered open, teal banner and all, exactly as it had for years. And there in the corner, bold as ever, was my admin login. Still active, still mine. They hadn't revoked my access. They hadn't even thought to check. It was a rookie mistake, one that told me exactly how much they underestimated me. They thought wiping me from the office would wipe me from the system. They forgot who built the protocols, who scheduled the distributions, who knew the skeletons tucked away in the miscellaneous expenses column. In my bottom desk drawer at the office, still locked with an old desk key, sat the real quarterly report. Not the smoothed-over fantasy the CFO adored, but the raw ledger. $48,137,026.14 in outflows, unallocated. A number that couldn't be softened with buzzwords or hidden behind euphemisms. I had carried those numbers in my head for weeks, watching them swell like a bruise. Now, sitting in my quiet apartment, I realized I didn't have to shout, didn't have to storm into the office demanding justice. All I had to do was let the numbers speak for themselves. I uploaded the file into the backup system I'd quietly maintained for years. Version 4.2RR. The one with every timestamp, every invoice, every trail of fingerprints. No edits, no disclaimers, just the truth, laid bare. I scheduled it for release at 8:59 a.m., 1 minute before the quarterly investor call began. 1 minute before the CFO could open his mouth and start spinning fiction. I closed the laptop, poured another glass of wine, and let the silence settle around me. Out the window, the city looked indifferent. Cars moved, lights blinked, lives went on. And somewhere downtown, my old office was preparing for tomorrow's performance. They thought they had erased me. They thought they had buried my work beneath fresh jargon and cheap smiles. But the truth doesn't stay buried. By morning, it would be louder than any of them could control. And for the first time that day, I felt calm. Not broken, not enraged, just steady. because I knew the story wasn't over. It was only waiting for the curtain to rise. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind wasn't racing with anger or panic. It was too steady for that. Instead, it was like the quiet hum of a machine you only notice when the world around it has gone silent. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about numbers, about words, about how thin the line is between trust and betrayal. By the time dawn seeped through the blinds, I was already up. I brewed my coffee black, no sugar, no cream. Just the sharp bitterness I needed to feel awake. Alive. My dog, Bailey, thumped her tail against the kitchen floor, confused by my sudden energy. I gave her breakfast, scratched her ears, then sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open in front of me. The portal was still logged in. It felt almost absurd, like leaving the keys to a vault under the doormat. The quarterly call was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp, just like always. My scheduled upload sat quietly in the queue, the timestamp ticking closer. The system didn't blink, didn't warn me, didn't even register my presence as unusual. 15 years of being the one who managed it meant I had designed the alerts to look for outsiders, hackers, anomalies. Not me. Never me. I thought about the faces around that boardroom table. The CFO, who liked to smirk when he thought he'd outsmarted the market. The CEO, whose words were more polished than his understanding of the numbers he recited. Carol from Investor Relations, who once cried in a stairwell after a mislabeled chart axis nearly cost us a major account. And the interns, bright-eyed, eager, so willing to believe they were part of something meaningful. Did they know? Did they realize the ground beneath them was already cracking? Or were they too busy sipping their coffee, rehearsing phrases like momentum and strategic direction to notice? At 8:58, I refreshed the page. Everything was quiet. At 8:59, a small confirmation appeared. Report distributed. My chest loosened, not with relief, but with a sense of inevitability. The truth had been released into the bloodstream of the system. There was no taking it back. I sat back, sipping my coffee as the investor call launched on my second screen. The familiar corporate background filled the frame, the logo in the corner, the sterile blue backdrop, the carefully curated setup meant to reassure. Names populated the participant list. Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, Vanguard, Bridgewater. Heavy hitters, the kind who didn't tolerate surprises. Usually the calls began with small talk. A joke about travel, a mention of someone's new baby, a quick exchange of pleasantries to humanize the sterile numbers. But this time, silence. The CEO appeared on screen, lips pursed, eyes darting, waiting. The CFO's name was there too, gray bubble blinking, but he hadn't spoken. 3 minutes passed. Then the chairman's voice cut through, calm and icy. Can someone please explain why the hell our report shows 48 million in unexplained outflows? I almost stopped breathing. That was it. The question that couldn't be softened, couldn't be rephrased into something digestible. It sat there like a live wire, and no one dared to touch it. Finally, the CFO unmuted. His voice cracked, like a teenager's mid-sentence. Yes, thank you, Chairman. That particular line item refers to transitional consultant costs and, deferred initiatives associated with legacy systems integration. Even he didn't believe what he was saying. You could hear it in the hesitation, the way his words fumbled and collided. He was trying to build a parachute out of jargon while already mid-fall. Then the questions came, sharp and relentless. Which systems exactly? Asked a voice I recognized from J.P. Morgan. Was this disclosed in previous guidance? Came another, clipped and impatient. Why are these consultants unnamed in the appendix? I knew those voices. I had trained myself for years to anticipate them, to phrase answers that calmed rather than provoked. But there was no calming this. The numbers were too raw, too specific, too damning. The CFO tried again, this time reading directly from what must have been the clean version of the report, the one he'd assumed was live. but every word clashed against the truth staring back at investors from their screens. You could almost hear the frantic math happening in the background, the clicking of keyboards, analysts pulling up last quarter's notes, spreadsheets opening side by side. 5 minutes into the call, the stock ticker slipped. 3%. By 10 minutes, 6. Not a crash, not yet. More like a car hitting black ice, sliding out of control. I didn't cheer. I didn't even smile. Instead, I felt the strangest sense of calm. I hadn't doctored the numbers. I hadn't manipulated a single line. All I'd done was stop protecting them. I let the truth out. And the truth did what it always does when it's been buried too long. It burned. Across the city, in their glass tower, I could imagine the chaos. Phones ringing, emails flooding, legal counsel being summoned. HR trying to draft responses while still pretending they had everything under control. And the CFO, the man who had smiled at my termination, was probably staring at the same numbers with the same sinking realization. For 15 years, I had been the one to keep the facade polished, the edges smoothed, the lies palatable. Now, I was gone. And without me, the cracks were visible to everyone. I leaned back in my chair, coffee cold, dog curled at my feet, and listened to the silence stretch across the call. Investors weren't fooled anymore. They were circling, hungry, ready to tear into the carcass of carefully curated spin. And me? I was just Miranda, sitting in a small apartment watching the empire I'd once propped up start to crumble under the weight of its own lies. This wasn't revenge. This was clarity. The call ended abruptly. No polite closing remarks, no "thank you for your continued trust." Just a frozen screen and a dropped connection, like even the software wanted no part of what had just unfolded. I sat in my kitchen staring at the blank monitor, my coffee long gone cold, Bailey snoring softly at my feet. For a moment, I felt nothing. No triumph, no anger, no relief. Just the quiet weight of inevitability settling around me. The truth was out. It had left my hands the moment that confirmation pinged. Still, I opened a market feed on my phone. The stock was halted. Reason: pending material disclosure. 4 words that meant federal auditors, SEC filings, board meetings behind closed doors. Somewhere downtown, a dozen executives were already dialing lawyers. I didn't smile. I thought of Carol, who would be crying at her desk, of the junior analysts scrambling to rewrite notes they didn't understand, of the intern, bright, eager Sasha, probably wondering what storm she'd stepped into. None of them deserved this. But then again, none of them had spoken up either. The CFO had always relied on silence. He weaponized it. In meetings, when someone raised a concern, he'd let the quiet stretch until their voice trailed off, until they felt foolish. Silence had been his power. Now, it was his punishment. My phone buzzed. A private number. I let it ring out. A voicemail popped up seconds later, followed by another, then another. I didn't listen. Not yet. I wasn't ready to hear the panic bleed through the professional polish. Instead, I poured myself another coffee and went to the window. Outside, the city looked the same. Buses wheezing down the street, people rushing to work, horns blaring. No one out there knew that a company was imploding 3 miles away. By noon, the messages stacked up. My former colleagues, a few journalists I vaguely recognized, even a number I knew belonged to one of our institutional investors. I turned my phone face down on the counter. If I opened even one, I'd be pulled back into the narrative. And this time, I wasn't the fixer. Bailey nudged my leg, leash in her mouth. Grateful for the distraction, I took her outside. The autumn air was crisp, the kind that pinches your cheeks and smells faintly of wood smoke. Neighbors nodded as we passed, oblivious. I walked slowly, deliberately, letting the rhythm of Bailey's paws on the pavement settle my nerves. The world was still turning, even if theirs wasn't. Back home, I finally pressed play on one voicemail. It was Carol. Her voice was shaky, urgent. Miranda, please, if you can call me back. They're saying it was a leak, that someone breached the system. They're trying to pin it on an external attack. I know it's not true. Please, I closed my eyes. A leak. That would be their story. Blame the faceless hacker, the nameless outsider. Better than admitting their own arrogance left the door wide open. Another voicemail. This one from an investor. His tone clipped, professional but carrying an undercurrent of barely restrained fury. Ms. Torres, we're aware of your history with the company. If you have information relevant to today's disclosure, it would be in your best interest to reach out. History. That's what 15 years became. History. I didn't respond. Not yet. Because if I said anything now, they'd twist it, frame it, use it to shift blame. Number. The numbers were enough. The numbers didn't need commentary. That evening, I made myself dinner. Nothing complicated. Chicken, rice, garlic. The kind of meal you make when your hands need a task but your mind is elsewhere. I ate standing at the counter, staring at the unopened envelope from HR I'd tossed aside the night before. Final paycheck, severance. As if a check could compensate for years of cleaning up their messes, covering their lies, teaching them how to earn trust they never deserved. I slid the envelope into a drawer without opening it. It meant nothing now. Sleep came easier than I expected. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe the certainty that there was nothing more for me to do. When I woke the next morning, the sun was already spilling across the floor, and my phone was buzzing nonstop. The news had broken. Headlines filled the screen. Company faces, scrutiny over unexplained $48 million outflows. CFO silent as investors demand answers. Stock plummets after report error. Error. That word made me laugh out loud, a sharp, humorless sound in my empty kitchen. It wasn't an error. It was the truth. And now it was too loud to ignore. By mid-morning, I couldn't avoid the calls any longer. A journalist from a financial outlet left a message that was less question and more invitation. We'd love to hear your perspective, given your role. Another from an old colleague was harsher. What did you do, Miranda? Do you realize what you've started? What I'd started. Number. What they had started. Years ago, when they decided numbers could be bent, twisted, disguised. When they believed loyalty could be bought with praise one day and discarded the next. I made myself another coffee and sat at the table. The truth was out. The cracks had widened. The board would scramble, the CFO would sweat, the investors would circle like sharks. And me? I wasn't part of it anymore. I wasn't their fixer, their shield, their storyteller. The following days blurred into a strange routine. Coffee, walks with Bailey, reading headlines that seemed to grow darker by the hour. Every time I opened my phone, there was another article dissecting the company's implosion. Words like fraud, audit, and shareholder revolt appeared with unsettling frequency. The stock hadn't just slipped anymore, it had cratered. Investors weren't just angry. They were furious. But the part that surprised me most was how quickly people tried to rewrite the story. The company released a statement claiming they had identified a system error leading to premature disclosure of incomplete data. A system error. As if numbers had minds of their own and had simply chosen to leap onto investor screens. I almost admired the attempt. Almost. But the investors weren't buying it. Calls for an independent investigation grew louder, and the board, those polished, untouchable figures I used to watch from the sidelines, were suddenly being named in the same sentences as subpoenas. My phone never stopped buzzing. Some messages were desperate, others were angry, and a few were quietly threatening. One night, close to midnight, I picked up a call from a number I didn't recognize. I shouldn't have, but exhaustion had dulled my caution. Miranda? The voice was low, male, urgent. You don't know me, but I represent a group of institutional stakeholders. We need to meet, face to face. I think you've got the wrong person, I said flatly. No, we don't. A pause then. You know exactly what those numbers mean. And so do we. If you're smart, you'll tell us everything. Before they try to make you disappear, the line went dead. I sat there in the dark, phone still pressed to my ear, Bailey's soft breathing the only sound in the room. Make me disappear. The words echoed louder than they should have. Maybe it was paranoia, maybe not. I knew too much, and for the first time I felt the weight of that knowledge pressing in from all sides. The next morning, I noticed a black sedan parked across the street. No plates I recognized, no obvious reason to be there. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe it wasn't. I didn't stare long enough to find out. Instead, I did what I always did when I needed clarity. I opened my laptop. The portal access was finally revoked. Too late, of course, but it made me laugh. They'd shut the barn doors after the horse had already galloped halfway across the prairie. Still, staring at the locked login page felt final. My chapter with them was closed, at least on paper. That afternoon, Carol called again. Against my better judgment, I answered. Miranda, please, you don't understand what it's like here right now. They're tearing each other apart. The CFO hasn't been seen in 2 days. The board is in emergency sessions. People are whispering about federal charges. Her voice cracked. It's terrifying. And they're looking for someone to blame. They're saying it's you. Of course they are, I said quietly. You should get a lawyer, or leave the city. Just be careful. Her words weren't dramatic. They were scared, and that scared me more than anything. That night, I packed a small bag. Not because I planned to run, but because something in my gut told me I needed to be ready. I'd lived my whole life meticulously organized, every detail accounted for. This was no different. Clothes, essentials, documents. And the envelope from HR, I finally opened it, not for the money, but because I wanted to see how little they valued me in print. It was insulting. 2 weeks' pay, a line about dedicated service, and a reminder that all company property should be returned. 15 years, reduced to 3 paragraphs and a signature. I slipped the check into the trash. The next day, headlines turned brutal. CFO resigns amid scandal. Federal investigators subpoena company records. And then, one that made me stop cold. Former senior executive believed to have knowledge of financial irregularities. Former senior executive. They didn't name me, not yet, but I knew it was coming. I could almost feel the spotlight shifting, moving from the faceless company to the very real me. I walked Bailey through the park that afternoon, every sound sharper than usual. The crunch of gravel underfoot, the distant siren, the chatter of strangers. For the first time, I wondered if I'd pushed too far. Not because the truth didn't deserve to be seen, but because the people caught in its wake weren't just numbers on a report. They were people I'd worked beside, laughed with, maybe even trusted once. Back home, I sat at the table, staring at the empty wine glass in front of me. What had I gained? Not money, not recognition, just freedom, yes. But freedom comes with a cost. My phone buzzed again, a text this time from an unknown number. You think you're safe? You're not. Meet us tomorrow, 10 a.m. downtown. Or we'll tell our version of the story. I stared at the screen, pulse steady but low, like the hum before a storm. They wanted control. They always had. But I had already learned the truth about control. It's an illusion. Still, the message left me with one undeniable thought. This wasn't over. Not for me, not for them, and not for anyone who believed silence could bury the truth forever. The message sat on my phone like a weight. Meet us tomorrow, 10 a.m. downtown. Or we'll tell our version of the story I barely slept. Not out of fear, exactly, but out of calculation. I kept replaying the possibilities. Was it a bluff? A trap? Or just another attempt to scare me back into silence? By morning, my decision was made. I wasn't going to run, and I wasn't going to hide. At 9:45 a.m., I walked into the downtown cafe where they'd told me to come. It was busy enough to feel safe, but quiet enough for serious conversations. I ordered a black coffee, sat at a corner table, and waited. My palms were steady. 15 years of investor relations teaches you how to hide nerves behind calm eyes. Two men walked in a few minutes later, suits too sharp to belong to regular businessmen. They spotted me instantly, slid into the booth across from me. One spoke first. "Miranda Torres." "You've made quite the mess," I didn't answer. Just sipped my coffee. Silence unnerves people quicker than anger. The other leaned forward. "You know what happens next. The company will blame you. They'll push a story about a disgruntled ex-employee sabotaging systems. The press will eat it up. Unless—" He paused, letting the word hang. "Unless you cooperate. Tell us everything you have. Quietly. Off the record. Then maybe you walk away from this intact." I studied their faces. They weren't bluffing. They had power, money, reach. But they also underestimated me, just like everyone else. "I don't have anything else," I said finally. The numbers spoke for themselves. "Don't play games," the first one snapped. "You kept records." "We know you did. Ledger copies, emails. If you hand them over, we can control the damage." There it was again. That word. Control. The thing they clung to like a lifeline. I leaned forward, voice steady. "Do you know what 15 years in that place taught me? That you can bury the truth for a while. You can dress it up, soften it, twist it. But eventually it breaks through. You want my files? I don't have to give them to you. Because every investor, every regulator, every journalist already has the only thing that matters: the truth." For a long moment, no one spoke. The clatter of dishes and hiss of the espresso machine filled the silence. The second man finally sat back, exhaling sharply through his nose. "You just made yourself a target," he said quietly. "Maybe," I answered. "Or maybe I just made myself free." They left soon after, frustrated, muttering under their breath. I didn't move until they were gone, my coffee cold in front of me. My heart was steady, calmer than it had any right to be. For once, I wasn't covering anyone else's lies. That afternoon, I met with a lawyer. Not because I was afraid of what they'd do, but because I knew I had to protect myself. We sat in his office for hours, drafting statements, preparing documents, making sure that if the company tried to smear my name, I could counter with evidence. Not revenge, not spin, just proof. Within days, the headlines shifted again. The CFO had officially resigned, effective immediately. Federal investigators had launched a probe. And the board? Half of them were suddenly retiring to spend more time with family. The euphemisms of downfall. As for me, the calls started to slow. The threats became whispers, then silence. My name never appeared in the press. Maybe because my lawyer had done his job. Maybe because the company knew they couldn't afford to fight me. Maybe because the truth was simply too loud to bury under one woman's reputation. One evening, I walked Bailey through the park at sunset. The air was cool, the sky streaked with orange and pink. For the first time in weeks, I felt my shoulders unclench. People around me laughed, jogged, carried groceries. Life, unaffected, kept moving. I thought back to that HR office, the envelope, the phrase, "Don't worry, we'll control the narrative." How certain they'd sounded, as if they were the authors of every story. But narratives are fragile things. They only hold if no one challenges them. I hadn't set out to destroy them. I hadn't set out to be a hero or a villain. All I had done was refuse to carry their lies anymore. I let the numbers stand naked in the light. And in the end, that was enough. The company would recover. Or maybe it wouldn't. People would lose jobs. New ones would be created. Another corporation would rise to take its place. That's the cycle. But something permanent had shifted in me. I no longer believed in the illusion of control. I believed in truth. And truth, once set free, doesn't need defending. It defends itself. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat by the window, and let Bailey curl up beside me. For the first time in a long time, I felt no bitterness, no weight, no need to plan the next move. The story was over, and it wasn't theirs anymore. It was mine. I'll never forget the way she said it. Starting today, you'll be reporting to me. Her voice was light, casual, almost playful, but her smirk carried the weight of a declaration of war. Her name was Candace, 26 years old, 18 years younger than me, with a resume that was still thin enough to fit on a single page. She had been hired just last week, yet somehow, overnight, she was announced as the new head of my department. I'd been with the company for nearly 2 decades. My title, Senior Operations Manager, didn't even begin to describe what I really did. I was the one who kept things running when budgets fell apart, when projects derailed, when clients threatened to leave. I had patched this company's leaks so many times that I sometimes joked I should be paid as a plumber instead of an executive. But that morning, standing in the glass-walled conference room with the rest of my team, I wasn't laughing. Candace stood in front of us like a queen before her court. She had that shiny kind of confidence you only see in people who haven't lived long enough to fail yet. Fresh haircut, designer suit, manicured nails that tapped impatiently on the desk as the CEO sang her praises. Candace will be bringing fresh perspectives, bold strategies, he said, his hand resting proudly on her shoulder. She's the kind of leader we need for the future. Allie, you'll be working closely with her during the transition. That word sliced through me like a knife. Transition meant being replaced. Transition meant I was the past. I forced a smile, even as my team's eyes darted toward me, curious, worried. Of course, I said calmly. I'm happy to help. Inside, though, I could feel my stomach twisting. Candace didn't waste a second. Allie, let's get your workspace sorted. I'll take your office. You can move into the smaller one down the hall. She spoke like it was already settled, not even waiting for my response. The room fell silent. My office. The office I'd earned after years of late nights, weekends sacrificed, holidays missed. The office where I'd celebrated wins, cried after losses, and built a career brick by brick. I nodded slowly. Understood. My voice was steady, though my hands weren't. By lunchtime, I watched maintenance staff carry out the desk my colleagues had gifted me after we hit record-breaking numbers 3 years ago. My plaques, my framed client letters of appreciation, all dumped into cardboard boxes. Candace trailed behind them, pointing, directing, her heels clicking across the floor like a metronome of arrogance. The bulky desk goes too, she instructed. It's ancient. Ancient. That word stung more than I wanted to admit. When I sat down at my new space, an uneven desk shoved near the supply closet, with a chair that squeaked every time I moved, I caught sight of myself in the computer monitor. For the first time, I looked replaceable. My phone buzzed. A message from HR. Please confirm receipt of the attached performance review draft. Confused, I opened it. My stomach dropped. It was a formal performance improvement plan, the kind of document they put in place before termination. Resistance to new leadership, lack of adaptability, reluctance to embrace innovation. I stared at the screen, my breath shallow. After 18 years, they were building a case against me. And then, as if on cue, my phone rang again. Howie here, my colleague's voice stammered. Allie, Candace has called a team meeting in the Willow Room. Just for department leads, I paused. When? Now. She said it's not necessary for you to attend. Excluded. From my own team. No problem, I lied. After hanging up, I noticed another email. This one from Candace, sent to the entire department. Attached was a glossy presentation on growth strategy innovation. I clicked it open, and my heart pounded. The slides were mine, word for word, number for number, the expansion plans I had drafted 6 months earlier. Market entry strategies for Spain, Portugal, and Greece. Client projections I had spent weeks refining. Proposals the CEO had once called too ambitious. Now, dressed up in Candace's logo-heavy template, they were suddenly visionary. My hands trembled as I scrolled through each slide. This wasn't coincidence. This was theft. By late afternoon, I was summoned to Candace's new office, my former office. She leaned casually against my old desk, scrolling through her phone. "Sit," she said without looking up. I stayed standing. Finally, she raised her eyes. "Your European strategy was well received today." "You mean my European strategy?" I asked, my voice quiet but sharp. She smiled without blinking. "Your research was useful groundwork, certainly, but groundwork isn't architecture. I've elevated it into something actionable." "You copied my work?" I said, word for word. "That's a serious accusation," she replied smoothly, slipping her phone into her pocket. "Especially from someone in your position." "My position?" She leaned forward, her smile widening. "People who stay too long in one place often grow territorial, resistant to change. The CEO understands this transition might be difficult for you. If you can't adapt, Allie, then maybe this company isn't the right place for you anymore." The words landed like a slap. I left her office without responding, my mind racing. They thought they'd cornered me. They thought I would break down, beg, or walk away quietly. But as I sat at my cramped desk, one thought crystallized in my mind. They had no idea who they were dealing with, and they were about to find out. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the day. Candace's smirk, the CEO's blind faith in her vision, the look on my colleagues' faces as they avoided eye contact. I had given this company 18 years of my life. I had sacrificed dinners with my husband, school plays, family vacations, all for a job that now seemed determined to erase me. And yet, despite the humiliation, I wasn't angry. Not in the way they expected. I felt clear. They thought my power came from a title, a desk, or an office with a view. But my real power was something they couldn't strip away so easily. Memory, documentation, 2 decades of watching, listening, and saving every important scrap of paper, every email, every contract. I kept an external hard drive at home, locked in a filing cabinet. A habit I'd built after nearly losing critical records during a server crash 10 years ago. That habit was about to become my weapon. The next morning, instead of crying in the bathroom or drafting a resignation letter, I went straight to that cabinet. I pulled out the drive and plugged it into my laptop. There they were. Thousands of files, meeting notes, contracts, presentations, financial reports, email backups, a complete shadow archive of the company's history. I spent hours scrolling, connecting dots, cross-referencing proposals with approval records. And then, there it was, buried in an old project folder. 6 months ago, I had submitted the European expansion strategy that Candace had claimed as her own. The original file still carried the timestamp of submission to the CEO's inbox. Even better, the follow-up emails where he rejected it. His words were clear. Too ambitious, not realistic. Now, the exact same numbers were suddenly revolutionary under Candace's name. It wasn't just about stolen ideas. This was evidence of something bigger. The CEO's selective blindness, the manipulation of leadership, the rewriting of history. But I wasn't ready to strike yet. Not until I had something undeniable. By week 2, Candace had tightened her grip on the department. She began hosting closed-door meetings with my team, and whenever I passed by, their laughter stopped abruptly. She walked through the office with the confidence of someone untouchable. One afternoon, I overheard her in the break room. Her voice carried just enough for me to catch the words. "Allie's a nice person, but she's stuck in old ways. The board sees me as the future. Honestly, it's only a matter of time before she phases out completely." I didn't confront her. I just noted it. Words can disappear in the air, but actions leave traces, and I knew where to look. The next day, HR called me in. A formal meeting. My stomach tightened as I sat across from a woman I'd known for years. "Allie, we've received concerns about your adjustment to new leadership. We'd like you to sign this acknowledgement of your performance improvement plan." She slid a document across the table. I skimmed it. Cold language jumped off the page. Resistant, outdated, not collaborative. I smiled faintly. "Of course. May I take this home to review before signing?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, but please return it by Monday." I left with the document tucked neatly in my bag. It was exactly what I needed. Proof they were laying the groundwork to push me out. That evening, I worked late at my kitchen table. I built a file, carefully layering evidence. The rejected proposal with its original timestamp, Candace's plagiarized slides, copies of emails showing my authorship of client strategies, the PIP ready to show how they were framing me. And then something else caught my eye. A financial report buried in a shared folder from last quarter. Candace hadn't even been hired yet, but her name appeared in the consultant review notes. She had advised the CEO before the merger was finalized. I sat back, stunned. Candace hadn't just appeared out of nowhere. She had been planted long before she walked through the doors on her first day. By midnight, the file was complete. Clean, undeniable, chronological. A single document that told the story from beginning to end. The next morning, I walked into the office calm and collected. Candace was already there, rearranging my former office to her liking, barking instructions to maintenance about replacing the blinds. She didn't even look up when I entered. "Allie, make sure the Winterman account files are transferred to me by end of day. Oliver prefers working with me now." I placed a folder on her desk. "Of course," I said softly. Her eyes flicked down. She opened it absent-mindedly, then froze. Her smirk vanished. Color drained from her face. This is," she stammered, flipping through the pages, each one carefully tabbed and highlighted. She shoved the chair back so hard it scraped the floor. You can't." Without another word, she stormed out of the office, the folder clutched in her hands. I watched her heels strike the floor in sharp, furious beats as she marched straight toward the CEO's office. I leaned back against the doorway, my heart steady. The first shot had been fired. And this was only the beginning. I didn't have to wait long. Within minutes, voices carried down the hallway from the CEO's office. At first muffled, then sharp. Candace's voice, high-pitched and frantic. Gerald, the CEO, trying to calm her down. I stayed at my desk, deliberately calm, clicking through emails as though nothing unusual was happening. By the time the door opened, the whole floor had gone silent. Candace stormed past, her face red, folder clutched tightly against her chest. She didn't even look at me. Gerald followed more slowly, his expression unreadable. "Allie," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "Could you step into my office for a moment?" I stood, smoothed my jacket, and followed him inside. The door shut with a soft click. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Gerald sat behind his desk, fingers steepled, his eyes searching mine. On the coffee table lay the folder I had placed on Candace's desk, now half open, papers spilling out. "Where did you get this?" he asked finally. "I compiled it," I replied. "From my own work files, emails, project archives. Every document in there belongs to the company. I've simply kept records." His jaw tightened. "You're accusing a new department head of plagiarism." "That's a serious claim, Allie." I leaned forward slightly. "It isn't a claim." "The timestamps, the emails?" They speak for themselves. He exhaled slowly, flipping through the pages again. You understand how this looks? Internal conflict. One leader undermining another. The board doesn't want politics, not after the merger. I held his gaze. This isn't politics. This is the truth. And if we ignore it, the consequences will be far greater than office gossip. He said nothing for a long moment. Then, reluctantly, we'll review it. In the meantime, I expect you to remain professional. No more. Surprises, I nodded once. Of course. But when I stepped out of his office, every pair of eyes in the corridor shifted toward me. People who hadn't spoken to me in weeks suddenly looked nervous. Darlene, who used to share lunches with me, offered a weak smile. Howie quickly turned back to his screen, pretending to be busy. Candace didn't return for the rest of the day. That evening, just as I was about to leave, a notification popped up on my screen. Meeting invite. Executive conference room. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., mandatory. No subject line, no agenda. Just one word in the sender field. Gerald. I knew then that this wasn't over. The next morning, I dressed carefully. Neutral colors, professional but understated. No sign of weakness, no sign of arrogance either. When I arrived, the entire executive team was already seated around the long, polished table. HR was there. Legal counsel, too. And at the far end, Candace. She avoided looking at me, her posture stiff, hands clasped tightly on the table. Gerald cleared his throat. We're here to address certain concerns that have been raised regarding departmental leadership. All eyes shifted to me. Candace was the first to speak. This is retaliation. Allie has been resistant from day one. I've done nothing but try to modernize our processes, and she's twisting things to protect her position. Her voice trembled slightly, but she masked it with indignation. I waited until she finished, then opened my laptop. With permission, I'd like to show a few documents. Gerald gave a curt nod. I projected the screen onto the wall. First, the original email I'd sent 6 months earlier. Proposal attached. The timestamp, the subject line, the CEO's reply. Too ambitious, not realistic. Then I opened Candace's version. Submitted last week. Identical numbers, identical targets, identical phrasing. Only the formatting had changed. Murmurs rippled around the table. HR leaned forward. This appears troubling. Candace snapped. Coincidence. Market analysis often produces similar results. I clicked to the next slide. Coincidence doesn't explain why the formatting errors in my draft, the extra space before Portugal, the misaligned bullet under Greece, appear exactly the same in her presentation. The room went silent. Gerald rubbed his temples. Candace, how do you explain this? Her jaw clenched. Allie is manipulating the narrative. She's been compiling records for years, obsessively. Who knows what else she's twisted? I closed my laptop calmly. Everything I've presented can be verified. Every file came from company servers. Nothing altered. Legal counsel scribbled notes, frowning. HR whispered something to Gerald. Finally, Gerald raised a hand. Enough. We'll conduct a full review. Both of you will remain in your positions until further notice. But I expect cooperation. No further escalation. Candace's chair screeched as she pushed back. This is ridiculous, she snapped, storming out of the room. The executives exchanged uneasy glances. I remained seated, hands folded neatly, my expression calm. When the meeting adjourned, Gerald caught my arm, his voice low, urgent. Allie, be careful. You've stirred something bigger than you realize. I met his eyes. I know. And I did. Because in my bag, alongside my laptop, I carried another folder. One I hadn't shown them yet. The one that proved Candace hadn't just stolen my work. She had ties to the company long before she was ever hired. And when the time was right, I'd show them. The review dragged on for days. HR sent me polite but pointed emails asking for clarifications on my documentation. Legal requested copies of my backups, which I carefully provided. Each time I walked into the office, I felt the air shift. Colleagues whispered when I passed. Some offered quick smiles, others avoided me completely. Candace, meanwhile, doubled down. She began holding impromptu team huddles without me. Every time I walked into the break room, her voice lowered just enough for the conversation to die. At one point, I caught her slipping into Gerald's office with a thick folder under her arm, her expression triumphant. By Thursday afternoon, I received a calendar invite marked confidential. Executive conference room, Friday, 8 a.m., mandatory. I knew what was coming. They weren't going to simply review my evidence anymore. They were going to put me on trial. Friday morning, I arrived early. The building was quiet, the kind of stillness before a storm. Inside the conference room, the full weight of leadership sat waiting. Gerald at the head, HR on one side, legal counsel on the other, and 2 board members who rarely attended internal meetings. Candace sat opposite me, her expression carefully neutral, though her fingers drummed nervously against the table. "Allie," Gerald began, his voice heavy, "we've reviewed your claims. But Candace has provided counter-evidence. Emails, performance reviews, and statements from several colleagues suggesting you've been resistant to change and territorial," I interrupted softly. "Outdated? Difficult to work with?" Gerald hesitated. "Yes." I smiled faintly. I expected as much. From her folder, Candace pulled a stack of printed emails. "Here. Proof. Team members saying Allie dismissed their ideas, ignored collaboration, slowed progress." She spread the pages like playing cards across the table. I reached into my bag and laid down my own folder. Full versions of those same emails. You'll see the edits she made when you compare legal counsel picked one up, frowning as he scanned it. Side by side, the differences were clear. Sentences cut mid-thought, context stripped away. A joke about slowing progress with too many coffee breaks transformed into a criticism of my management. Murmurs rippled across the table. Candace's cheeks flushed. "She's twisting this." I stayed calm. "No, I simply kept the records. That's the difference between us, Candace. You manipulate stories. I preserved them for a moment. The room tilted in my favor." Gerald rubbed his temples, clearly torn. That was when I placed one more sheet on the table. Not dramatic, not flashy. Just a printed contract note from 6 months ago. "This," I said evenly, "is a consultant agreement." Notice the signature at the bottom. The board members leaned forward. The name was unmistakable. Candace Palmer. She was advising this company before she was hired. I continued. Paid as a consultant during the merger. That's why she walked in on her first day with strategies already in hand. That's why she knew exactly which projects to target. She wasn't a fresh voice. She was groomed for this. The silence was heavy. Gerald's face paled. HR's pen froze mid-scribble. Finally, one of the board members spoke. "Gerald, did you authorize this?" His throat bobbed. I was told it was a short-term arrangement to assist with market analysis. Without disclosure to the board? Candace slammed her hands on the table. "This is outrageous. Allie is fabricating connections because she's jealous. Look at her. She's desperate to hold on to power she no longer deserves." But her voice cracked at the edges. I leaned forward, my tone steady. "This isn't about jealousy. It's about integrity. 18 years I've given to this company. Do you think I'd risk everything on a lie? Or do you think maybe the real lie walked in the door wearing a designer suit and calling it leadership?" Candace shot to her feet. "You don't get to talk to me like that." "Sit down," one of the board members said sharply. The room fell quiet again, the air heavy with tension. Gerald finally spoke, his voice weary. "We'll need to investigate this further. Effective immediately, both of you will be placed on administrative leave until the review is complete." Candace gasped. "What? You can't—" But the decision was final. HR slid papers across the table outlining the terms. Full pay, suspension of duties, no access to company systems. Candace snatched hers, face burning, and stormed out without another word. I gathered my papers slowly, calmly. Anything else? Gerald shook his head. That will be all. As I walked out, I caught sight of my team gathered by the coffee station. They looked at me with wide eyes, whispers already spreading. But I didn't stop to explain. I had been silenced, yes, but not defeated. Because I knew something they didn't. Administrative leave had just given me exactly what I needed. Time. And I wasn't going to waste it. 2 weeks on administrative leave felt like 2 years. The first few days, I woke up at my usual 6 a.m., only to sit in silence with a cup of coffee, wondering who I was without the constant pull of emails, meetings, and deadlines. But then something shifted. The silence stopped feeling empty. It started feeling freeing. For the first time in years, I had space to think, to observe, to connect dots I hadn't seen before. I spent my mornings combing through files, not out of desperation, but out of habit, and the patterns became impossible to ignore. Candace's consultant work wasn't just casual advice. She had been in communication with one of our major competitors during the merger. Her name appeared in meeting notes, hidden in footers of documents no one had bothered to check. Payments routed through a market analysis firm that, with a little digging, traced straight back to that competitor. It wasn't just plagiarism anymore. It was infiltration. By the end of the second week, I had built a file so detailed even the most skeptical lawyer would have trouble dismissing it. Emails, payment records, consultant agreements, shell company registrations. A chain of evidence that connected Candace not just to our company, but to the very people who stood to gain if we failed. And still, no word from Gerald or the board. Delays. Silence. The oldest corporate trick in the book? Stall until the storm passes. But I wasn't about to let them bury this. On the Monday of the third week, I put on my best suit and drove to the office. My badge still worked. The receptionist gave me a startled look, but I walked past her without hesitation. The board was meeting that morning. I knew because I'd seen the schedule circulated before my suspension. I walked straight to the executive floor, carrying one slim manila folder. Outside the boardroom, Gerald nearly choked when he saw me. "Allie, you can't be here. You're still on leave." "I know," I said calmly. "I just have one document to submit before you make your decision." The room fell quiet as I entered. 12 board members, HR, legal counsel. Candace wasn't there, though I had no doubt she was waiting somewhere, preparing her next move. I placed the folder on the table. "Before you finalize anything, you should see this." They hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a simple one-page summary. Not the whole mountain of evidence, just the sharpest peaks. Dates, payments, shell companies, Candace's name linked directly to the competitor who had quietly acquired stakes in our firm. The room shifted as they read. Eyes widened. One man muttered a curse under his breath. A woman at the far end rubbed her forehead like she was fighting a headache. Finally, one of the senior members looked up. "Is this verified?" "Every detail," I replied. "And every source is public record. Anyone with patience and a memory could have pieced it together. I just happened to notice what others ignored." The silence stretched until Gerald cleared his throat. His face was pale. "We'll need immediate legal review." "If this is true—" "It is true," I interrupted softly. "And you know it. You've seen the signs for months. You just chose to believe in a shiny new leader instead of the people who built this company brick by brick." No one spoke. I gathered my bag and straightened my jacket. "You don't need to decide my future here," I continued. "I already have. I'm resigning, effective immediately." Gasps around the table. Gerald leaned forward. "Allie, wait. We need you." I shook my head. "No, you need someone you respect." And that was never me. You applauded when my work was stolen. You put me on a performance plan after 18 years of loyalty, and you ignored every warning until it threatened your bottom line. I won't fight for a seat at a table where I was never valued. I walked out before they could respond. That afternoon, as news spread of Candace's suspension pending investigation, my phone rang nonstop. Messages from former colleagues, clients, even competitors. Word had gotten out. About the file, about the infiltration, about me. One message stood out. Oliver from Winterman Group. If you're leaving that circus, we'd like to talk. We could use someone with your eye for detail. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. That evening, I sat on my porch with a glass of wine, watching the sunset. The company I had given 18 years to was crumbling under the weight of its own arrogance. Candace would face consequences, maybe even legal ones. Gerald would scramble to reassure shareholders. And me? I was free. Revenge wasn't about seeing her fired or exposing the board's blindness. My revenge was something simpler, sharper. It was walking away on my own terms, with my reputation intact, my integrity proven, and my value recognized by people who actually mattered. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destruction, it's refusing to be erased, and rising so far above those who underestimated you, they become irrelevant to your story.